The president decided a few days ago that it was important to issue one final warning on this issue to make very clear, to leave no doubt, that we have people out there still peddling the big lie. People now raising the issue of election denial in this election.
Nobody is denying there is an election 4 days from today, next Tuesday, November the 8th, 2022. That was White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain warning of possible violence in and around Election Day next week without citing a single specific warning or threat and without mentioning what the administration is doing to prevent that from happening. This as the president himself continues to call Republicans a threat to democracy.
Joining us now is former Homeland Security Advisor and former Secret Service Special Agent Charles Marino. Good morning, Charles.
Morning.
Charles, good to have you back. Wondering what you make of these threats without any specific examples or warnings. Are these just empty threats by Ron Klain?
Yeah, no, you're right. Look, there's no specific credible intelligence related to the midterm elections or violence. This is more of a broad bulletin, a joint intelligence bulletin that was issued by the Department of Homeland Security and FBI saying that the heightened threat environment related to the midterm elections and contentious issues on the ballot and candidates could increase the level of violence that takes place in the country. I think that's a no-brainer, which is why we have agencies in place to help protect events like this and the people associated with them.
Yeah, Charles, I wonder by kind of putting this out there that may perhaps scare people from going to the polls or could maybe even incite more violence because people are just expecting it. It's interesting that they put this out with no credible threats.
Yeah, no, that's right. Look, if we look at the level of threats that the Capitol Police and Secret Service are experiencing, yes, they are particularly high. I think in 2021, the Capitol Police had close to 10,000 threats against members of Congress. So then put the protections in place to protect those individuals, not just when they travel, but also at their residences. We saw the incident at the Pelosi residence. A good way for the administration to start saying that that's unacceptable behavior would have been to enforce the law to prevent the protests outside of the Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices, for example.
Right.
Those protests still go on, and that law has not been enforced. So if we looked at signaling in terms of what's okay actions to be taken by individuals within the political construct, the administration is signaling that that's okay by allowing that to continue. So you don't want this intelligence bulletin to dissuade Allison people from going to the polls. And you also don't want to put a certain group of people in a bucket. If you're using the term domestic violent extremism, I hope, as I read this, that they're not just referring to Republicans here, because we know that these threats can come from across the political spectrum.
So that's an interesting point, Charles, because I think if we weren't looking at what could be a red wave, a big red wave next Tuesday, I'm not convinced that Ron Klain would be talking about stuff like this because he would want to make sure that every single Democratic voter gets out there and casts their ballot on Tuesday, on Election Day. But because we are, maybe by putting that out there, that does keep people home. Is the concern that, okay, in New York, for example, if Lee Zeldin does win, we're going to see riots and protests in New York City, for example, if Lee Zeldin beats Kathy Hochul? Is that what he's trying to get at by saying something like that?
Well, look, I think that possibility always exists. Again, have the measures in place, be prepared for things like that. We know that if Lee Zeldin beats Governor Hochul, that would be a huge upset. So we would anticipate some type of reaction. You know, I view that as falling in the general category of public discourse in response to an election. Nothing unusual. But should it go over the line, then law enforcement needs to be allowed to, one, plan for the event, two, be allowed to do their jobs by politicians, and three, keep law and order. This is nothing new that we haven't seen throughout the history of our country. But, you know, you got to be careful that you're not scaring people when there's a lack of specific credible intelligence. Look, we know that there are people that align to the extreme positions of politics on all sides. I've dealt with it in the 20 years of my career in the Secret Service.
Yeah.
I've seen it. We know it. You've got to mitigate it. and be prepared for it.
Well, we saw it Friday with the hippie nudist that broke into the Pelosi residence in San Francisco. You know, the left wants to characterize this 42-year-old man as somebody who was a big Trump supporter, and it's like, I'm sorry, that just doesn't pass the smell test right now.
Yeah, and Rob, let's face it, if the correct protective protocols were in place, that incident never happens.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, Charles Marino, good to see you. Busy few days. Hope to have you back before Tuesday. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
No crooked establishment.
None of that twisting the
truth.
No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax.
Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think.
They let
me decide.
Newsmax.
real news
For real people.